Hello and welcome to the Not Badger for the week ending March 5th, 2017. Here, thanks to our acolytes of Keck, who are on an 8-year spiritual pilgrimage to bring us a great bounty of lulls, we now have a collection of interesting, funny, and hopefully useful clips from our most watched shows. Enjoy the bounty brought forth from their hard work. In Polecat Cast number 102, we talked about the news of the week, including Casey Affleck's Oscar, Big Pharma drugging children, Let's Go Abigail, and a decrease in testosterone. Oklahoma.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. So I'd ask you to contemplate this question to yourselves for just a few seconds, both my panelists and everybody that's watching the show. What do Mel Gibson, Roman Polanski, Marlon Brando, and Christian Bale, what do they all have in common? If you think it's the fact that they are all talented individuals who have won multiple awards for their craft, you'd be correct. If you think it's the fact that they are all assholes whose behavior has, at points, gone from crass to criminal, you'd be correct. Casey Affleck, brother of Batman, was awarded the title of Best Actor this past Sunday at the 89th Annual Academy Awards. For several weeks, pundits, journalists, and other industry workers recognized Affleck's performance in the film Manchester by the Sea as deserving of the top honor. However, like the four aforementioned assholes, he has allegedly, and Michael Jackson tone of voice, allegedly done some despicable things to past female co-workers. Now, according to a report from the Daily Beast, Affleck had charges brought against him by two former female producers on a 2010 film called I'm Still Here. It was the mockumentary featuring Joaquin Phoenix. He supposedly did such heinous acts like order a crew member to flash his penis at one of the producers, recount his sexual exploits consistently, caress a woman's back while she was sleeping, the woman being one of the two producers, and sent one of them abusive text messages, just to name a few examples. Affleck settled out of court with the two women. This whole situation, though, has fired up debate online over the past few weeks on whether or not the politics of this situation, or any situation like this, should influence the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences' decision to award somebody for their craft. Should one's art stand alone from one's personal behavior? I turn this over to the Honey Badgers.
Well,
in what other profession do we have that standard? I mean, how long do athletes have to wait in between getting in trouble for crass or criminal behavior and actually being able to get recognized for theirs? There's multiple times where athletes have had honors taken away from them because they have done something that's been disapproved or has been considered illegal or has offended people. I'm kind of curious why artists should be exempt from that standard.
I actually am trying to build a career where I can work in the entertainment industry, either as a producer or an actual laborer, like a filmer, editor, that sort of thing. And I tend to hold the Oscars in pretty high regard because in comparison to all of the other award shows, I believe that the method on which they try to determine which films have the most merit in whatever area you're talking about, whether it's the performances, the cinematography, the editing, I believe that that particular format is best at recognizing which films do it best. It's not perfect. You know, there are some times where they actually snub out films that actually are deserving of recognition, but I think it's the best that we got. In respect to this situation about whether actors or, you know, whoever in Hollywood is exempt from their crimes, I'll try and draw a comparison to somebody that I brought up at the beginning of the summary, Roman Polanski, right? That guy directed Chinatown. He directed Rosemary's Baby. He directed The Pianist. All of which are recognized as some of the greatest films ever made. But that guy is a fucking child rapist. Mm-hmm. A proven child rapist. And for that reason, I think it's perfectly reasonable for people to say, no, don't go see this guy's movies. Do not give him your money. Do not try to let him, you know, finance his life until he pays his debt to society. But, you know, he ran off like a little bitch to France and you never got punished for it. Whereas with Casey Affleck, you have a much more difficult situation because the allegations were never proven. You know, like apparently abuse, for example, abusive texts were sent to one of the producers, yet we've never seen that evidence, and they settled out of court, so we don't really know exactly what happened between those two those three people rather.
If they settled out, there's an NDA and it won't come out.
Yeah, exactly. So in that respect, you can't, it's hard to take a definitive moral stance on this, but I can guarantee you that as a result of this scandal, Casey Affleck is going to have a hard fucking time trying to find any work in the future, despite the fact that he won Best Actor. Now, here's where I guess my controversial stance comes in on this. Because I personally hold the award in such high regard, I believe that based on the performance that I saw Casey Affleck give in Manchester by the Sea, I believe he gave the best performance of this past year. And I believe that if one were to let politics openly influence the way that that award is given out, then it will become a slippery slope where it affects the way that the other awards are given out in the future. Because, you know, like I agree with all you guys, Hollywood is filled with scumbags. You know, Tom Cruise, like you brought up, Scott. But the thing is, artists can be really messed up people, and in that being messed up, they can produce truly great work.
Well, they often are messed up. Often.
Yeah, and yes, often. And the fact is, you know, humbler, nicer people that are greater, more stand-up kinds of citizens can watch that work, take from that work, and recognize how other people recognized it as a great performance, as a great film, or whatever. And if politics influences that, then people might be missing out on something truly special. Don't financially support these people if they're assholes, but recognize them if they made the best art.
A bit of a conundrum. I think Max and I are on the same page with this. I love movies. I hate Hollywood. And that's where I'm at. You know, like
that's about where I'm at too.
I love movies. I hate Hollywood, but I will not hate people individually within Hollywood. It's just the culture I don't like. Just because somebody said they did something at some point, or there might be there's reason to suspect this, that, or the other. Like even at the end of this Jezebel article, which is where I got this from, they mention that Mel Gibson was, you know, because he showed up, and there were people who said, "Oh, you made a great comeback," you know, because he made this movie. The war movie, Hacksaw Ridge. Yeah. He made the war movie, and it was getting a lot of awards, and everybody was talking about how great it was. And Jezebel pointed out that he was essentially being congratulated on his comeback, as though he should never, ever have gotten to see the light of Hollywood, like ever got to make a movie ever again because of the things that he did in the past. And I think that I'm of the kind of person that I understand shit happens, and I don't know anything about his or anybody's personal problems, struggles, mental illness, whatever. But I think that when people fuck up after they pay their penalty, they should be given an opportunity to essentially make good and return to whatever industry or community they were in, provided they, you know, essentially paid their dues. And I think that he did. Jerome Kagan, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, one of the most renowned psychologists of the 20th century, believes that the modern diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, is an invention. The National Institute of Mental Health, ADHD, is marked by an ongoing pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity and impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development. Where once mental disorders were unknown amongst children, a Spiegel interview with Jerome Kagan cited that 1 in 8 children are diagnosed as mentally ill in the U.S. Kagan believes this is primarily due to fuzzy diagnostic practices. Quote, every child who's not doing well in school is sent to see a pediatrician, and the pediatrician says, quote, it's ADHD. Here's Ritalin. In fact, 90% of these 5.4 million children don't have an abnormal dopamine metabolism. The problem is, if a drug is available to doctors, they'll make the corresponding diagnosis, end quote, according to Kagan. Continuing, quote, if you do interviews with children and adolescents aged 12 to 19, and then 40% can be categorized as anxious or depressed. But if you take a closer look and ask how many of them are seriously impaired by this, the number shirks to 8%. end quote. Children inaccurately diagnosed as mentally ill because they think there is something fundamentally wrong with them has further reaching consequences than the original problem. Using his younger self as an example, Kagan said he suffered from restlessness and stuttering as a child, but his mother told him there was nothing wrong with him, only his mind was working faster than his tongue and didn't feel further anxiety from the issue. Mislabeling common adolescent problems like anxiety and depression as mental illness can have negative psychological impacts, reaching beyond the original issues or amplifying them. Kagan points out that children being diagnosed with ADHD are mostly those not doing well in school, asking why not tutoring instead of pills? Footnote. This is important. Kagan became highly regarded with his pioneering work at Harvard, observing and documenting how infants and small children grow. He wanted to know how personality emerges and what determines mental illness later in life. His most significant contribution was an examination of innate temperaments, finding that as early as 4 months, 20% of babies already have skittish reactions to novelty. He found that these babies, known as high reactives, would tend to develop into anxious children and adults.
Okay.
May I?
Yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
you go ahead, Max. No, you're good. You're good. Take it.
Okay, so I suppose on the surface, the first paragraph that you read, where the title of it is ADHD, a hoax, and then the man says it's an invention. Obviously, as Hannah just pointed out, my instinct is to get outraged because I actually do have ADHD. But the argument that he's making actually makes sense, and I understand where he got there logically, because there are a lot of children that are put on these types of drugs where a lot of the issues that they have aren't necessarily due to having mental illness. For example, I'm sure that you guys have brought up on multiple shows prior to this the issue of how boys are particularly prone to being medicated because they don't tend to adapt to the classroom environment as well as girls do, and as a result they're put on this type of medication. So there's that problem. Yeah, so it doesn't seem like he's saying that ADHD doesn't exist. It's just the fact that it's overdiagnosed when it doesn't need to be.
Right.
So,
he says that if you do interviews with children and adolescents aged 12 to 19, 40% can be categorized as anxious or depressed, i.e. they usually get diagnosed with ADHD. But if you take a closer look and ask how many of them are seriously impaired by it, the number shrinks to 8%.
there you go.
So he says it is a thing, but it's overblown, in his opinion, by a large margin.
Destiny Frascari, better known as her current stage name, Princess Nokia, really? Fucking Princess Nokia. I'm sorry, I just have to dress her down a little bit on how dumb that is a New York City-based rapper, singer, and songwriter with an undeniable feminist leaning. Recently, during a charity performance at Cambridge University, Frascari stormed off stage to assault an audience member, an alleged heckler. The audience member in question was claimed to have been mouthing dirty obscenities like "show me your tits" directed towards Frascari.
Tits or get the fuck out.
Yeah, exactly. She reportedly then left the stage and struck the audience member several times and threw drinks at him before returning to the stage and declaring, "That's what you do when a white boy disrespects you."
Really great impression, Scott.
You like that? Thank
Yeah,
you. I'm feeling it. I'm trying to inhabit the character of this dipshit. Shortly after the incident, Frascari cut her set short and left the stage for the night. Later on, in an interview given to the Cambridge student, the victim of Frascari's assault denied any heckling at all and was only shouting, "Let's go, Abigail," after hearing from another audience member that the performer's name was Abigail. Cambridge University has yet to issue any comment on the situation.
A big problem in our society that we have a situation where women feel entitled to hit because they're mad. That's half of what causes domestic violence. Not that this was a domestic situation, but that is half of what causes domestic violence. Women feel entitled to get physical when they're mad. And they hit, they push, they shove, they get in your face, they stick your finger halfway up your nose, just like it's ridiculous to say that half of society can do that, and the other half has to sit there and be stoic in their response to it, and put up with it and not react. That's not right. Mm-hmm. And it's not right to allow somebody to get away with it in a case like this where it's a stranger either.
Men low on testosterone. A study published back in 2006 in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that testosterone levels in American men have been declining over the past couple of decades. They based their study on data from the Massachusetts Male Aging Study, that's the MMAS. In 1988, 50-year-old men had higher serum testosterone concentrations than comparable 50-year-old men in 1996, suggesting factors besides age are contributing to the observed decline. Researchers also attempted to account for additional factors such as obesity, smoking, and medications, finding that the subject's total testosterone decreased on an average of 1.2% every year. The observed declines could have been altered by subtle changes in the way that the samples were obtained or processed and or unmeasured health or environmental factors, so the study should be taken with a grain of salt. Hopefully, researchers will continue this work and more studies will attempt to replicate those results for the modern age. Low serum testosterone has been linked to obesity, diabetes, low bone and muscle mass, low libido, and other medical conditions. Okay.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to stop me.
It's okay, Scott.
I was going to say, just real quick, we talked about this before, like how there's, when you talk about medications being flushed and it getting into the water system, how like birth control gets flushed a lot, and that shows up in, parts of membrane in the water system. And then we have things like BPA, the stuff that they line, or is it BPH? Christ.
I think it's BPH is what you're talking about.
I think it's BPH.
Yeah, it's BPH.
Yeah, and they line soda cans and food cans with it, and apparently that has an effect on estrogen and testosterone levels. So, I think it's probably largely due to those kind of things. Is that everything is dipped in fucking chemicals. It's like, and that's at some point that stuff's going to get back into your body. You're going to absorb it. And it's going to have a reaction. Your body's going to have a reaction to it. So,
yeah.
There's another aspect to this. The discussion about low testosterone being linked to that specific set of health problems. All of the ones on the list after obesity are linked to obesity. In the 80s, for some stupid reason, the prevailing wisdom among dietitians and medical personnel was that eating fat made you fat, and it was better to eat more carbs. And we went through an entire generation of people eating carb-heavy meals that ended up getting fat and developing diabetes and all of these other health problems, heart conditions, and all this other stuff. And I suspect that is a major contributing factor, simply because I've learned that is a similar effect, has a similar effect on women. The pill can affect your personality overall.
Yeah.
So there are your other hormones have an effect on. If you're not paying attention to your changes in your character, that the pill can affect a lot of things, and that's something that it's not really emphasized when you go in and talk to the doctor about birth control. That this can have, like, it gets brought up, but it doesn't really get emphasized much, that you need to watch for changes in mood and changes in the way sort of your personal outlook and everything. And I did use hormonal birth control for a number of years, and it did have an effect. And I could at the time I was aware to a degree, partly because people would tell me about it that knew me, that were close to me, but also partly because I do things or feel a certain way about things, and I'd be like, why is this happening? And maybe it's the pills. A lot of people don't have that awareness of how their medication affects them. They don't think about, hey, maybe it's the pills. It's a drug. Just like if you use street drugs, they affect your brain. Drugs that you get from the pharmacy can also affect your brain. Even the simplest stuff that you take. Even
Sugar
stuff that you're taking. Well, yeah, sugar has a massive effect on your brain. But, we also don't necessarily know all the effects of artificial sweeteners. There's some indication, for instance, that that drinking diet pop, there's significant indication that drinking diet pop contributes to obesity, not because the pop itself has calories that make you fat, but because the degree of satisfaction with it is different, and the signals that your brain gets from that degree of satisfaction are different, and you have a tendency to eat more when you drink diet pop. And there's some people that have done studies that have countered that, and there's studies that have confirmed that, and they've all the studies that have been done on it are associated with either the sugar industry or the artificial sweetener industry, and there's not really anything independent.
Imagine
so you
that.
kind of have to look closely at it.
Right.
But from what I've seen in the people around me, it really looks to me like there is some validity to the suspicion that artificial sweeteners contribute to obesity rather than preventing it. And it's better to just, like I said, there's no magic bullet. There's no substitute for moderation. Eat real sweeteners and don't overdo it.
Oklahoma has just passed what news outlets such as the Bipartisan Report are calling the most oppressive law against women in history. The bill, House Bill 1441, penned by Republican State Representative Justin Humphrey, would require that women considering abortion reveal the father's name and provide his written, informed consent before she could have the abortion. The bill makes several notable exceptions, such as in cases of rape, incest, the father no longer being alive, or in cases where carrying the pregnancy to term would endanger the life of the mother. State Attorney for Planned Parenthood, Tamia Cox, opposes the bill, stating, while it made exceptions for rape, incest, and death of the partner, it did not consider women in abusive relationships. One of the very numerous problems with this bill is that there are so many questions left unanswered that may never be answered. Author of the bill, Representative Humphrey, had previously said, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered in this bill. I'm willing to work with any of y'all to change things, to work with either side to make a better bill. Currently, the bill has passed the committee. In a 5-2 vote, it still needs to clear the House, Senate, and Governor to become law.
I had health problems that complicated things, and I think none of that really supersedes the question of whether we are dealing with one body or two bodies. And it's a situation where, I've said this before, when you get into the abortion discussion, you have multiple sides in the discussion. There's not two sides to this discussion. There's like 50 on each, quote, side, end quote. But the pro-life side is generally based on the understanding that the fetus is a separate entity. It is a living human organism that is genetically different from the mother. And it's genetically different from the mother because it has the contribution of both the mother's and the father's DNA. So from the standpoint of it being a genetically unique living human organism, or a genetically unique set of living human organisms in the case of twins, that is genetically unique from the mother, that this law only makes sense in terms of an attempt at preventing birth control abortion. And I hate to use the term, but that's basically what they're targeting with this, is abortion done as a substitute for birth control.
I would say that I don't think that this is a good way to go about doing this, because I do think that, like as Scott points out, women have to carry it. Ultimately, they'll probably be the one most impacted by whether or not they decide to take the baby to term. And I think that I like the idea that a man has some kind of input. That doesn't mean he has influence, but should have some input. I'm okay with that. But the fact is, that's not going to happen in terms of whether or not this will pass. What if the thing you want to do is essentially make it to where the man and the father and the mother in this case have some kind of semblance of control when these things happen, and usually when we're talking about abortions, we're talking about things that were unintended, then I think that what's probably best is to give men the option to financially abort, as opposed to giving men the option that, well, making it to where women have to get like a signed permission slip from the man, because what that's going to result is that women are just going to go and get abortions done in ways that are dangerous to them, as well as well, not that that makes a difference since you're trying to kill the fetus anyway, but it's actually going to be more dangerous for them and under sketchier circumstances if you take away abortion. You can't do that now.
In Rant Circle number 78, Karen and Allison look at an older video by the feminist prophet Lacey Green to see how right she was about the war on women being led by Trump and the Rapepublicans.
Well, there you go. One prediction stacked up. It was robust and well developed, as it were.
As it were. Well, I mean, she's probably thinking, the only reason one of these guys could end up president is because Americans are like freaking a bunch of bigots, right? Oh, at least the ones in the flyover states.
Well, because all Republicans, there's no actual legitimacy or any kind of moral legitimacy to Republicans. This is what I was getting into with this war on women rhetoric that the Democrats have developed. They have, for in their minds, there's no longer two legitimate parties. There's just one. And even Trump's more moderate position isn't enough. Just the only morally legitimate position in our society is the Democrat one, the left one. That's it. Because the right is engaging in a war on women.
Well, yeah, and the war on women is, I mean, it's over. Like what they describe as a war on women is, things like transvaginal ultrasounds and stuff like that. It's like, before you get to get an abortion, right? And a lot of that stuff is actually, it's indicated by proper medical procedures, right? You want to see the lay of the land in the uterus. You want to be able to date the fetus. You want to be able to know exactly where the placenta is. And at the very early stages of pregnancy, you can't do that through the abdominal wall. You can only do it through and I know this because, when they were looking for, what they thought would probably be little tiny lesions on the inside of my uterus, they didn't send me for an abdominal ultrasound. They sent me for a transvaginal one, right? Because they were looking for something really small and trying to identify it. And you can't find something the size of a thumbnail with an ultrasound through the abdominal wall. You just can't, right? And maybe if women didn't lie about how far along in their pregnancies they are, which is also medically risky, if you're performing an abortion and you're told that the fetus is this far along and you trust that, and then you find out it's 6 or 8 or even 12 weeks further along, right? And you're performing one procedure when you should be performing a different one, right? That ain't good.
No, it's all a tactic of oppressing women. Yeah, it's a war on women.
Like, you're literally going in to have instruments inserted in your vagina, right? Have your cervix dilated and have the contents of your uterus sucked out. Okay? It's an invasive, painful procedure, yet having a thin wand, that you can't even feel inserted into your vagina, that is rape. That's essentially rape.
Yeah, it's a little bit of, and I'm pro-choice, but the other thing that I would point out is that the situation for women, they can divorce consent to sex to consent to parenthood, and men can't. So we don't care about men's bodily autonomy there. So if that's a war against women, then the war has already been fought and won against men. And they're already in the prison camps, being raped and tortured.
Contraceptive access restricted, a big part of why he's relentlessly railed against Obamacare. He's voted to defund Planned Parenthood because it's an assault on our liberties, and by that he means an assault on men's liberty to control women's bodies.
Oh my God.
It's because the narrative works, Karen. If you can frame it, if you can tell your male feminists that they're defeating the evil male Republicans, it resonates more with them.
Yeah, well,
it feels better.
You think Ann Coulter, she's totally 100% pro-choice. She's totally pro-abortion. She's like, she donated money to Planned Parenthood's $8 billion abortion plex, right? Yeah, no, she didn't, because she's pro-life, like a lot of women in the U.S.
But that's how they maintain their narrative over all of this.
It's always about men, and it's not about men. It's not about men who honestly believe that the fetus is a human life and that it should be preserved as, as something that is sacred, that as something that has the right to exist, right? No. It's not about that, right? It is about them wanting to control women's bodies. I mean, it's not even about, notice how she says, it's not about controlling women's choices or even controlling women's lives. It's about controlling women's bodies, because that just puts this whole salacious, kind of perverted, sexually perverted kind of thing on it, right? That it turns it into a sexual interest on the part of these men to control women's bodies, to control women's vaginas, to control women's sexuality, all of those things, right? As opposed to, controlling women's behavior or their lives or their choices or whatever, because those don't have that.
Or God forbid, preserving what they consider human life.
Yeah. But I mean, even if they were going to go for that, yeah, they're trying to control women, right? No, so they always got to go for that kind of perverted, salacious,
they're after our bodies, our women's bodies. They're after them. They're at the gate. They're going to violate our women's bodies. Male feminists, you're so progressive in your thinking. God. It's like, this is the most regressive, archaic impulse imaginable. And they paint it up in this the colors of progressivism. It's hilarious. It's like taking a Cro-Magnon and putting him in a suit and saying, yeah, this is modern man.
It's just like when you remember when that member of the House of Representatives in, I forget where it was, freaking Michigan or wherever, she said they were debating an abortion bill, and she said something along the lines of, Mr. Speaker, I'm flattered y'all are so interested in my vagina, but no means no, right? And then she got suspended. And all the feminists were like, she got suspended for using medically correct terminology. She used the word vagina, and that's why she was booted out. No, she was booted out. She was suspended because she implied that anyone who was going to vote in favor of restricting abortion was doing it because they have a sexualized interest and a violative interest in her vagina, right? That's what it was. It was essentially, she was accusing them of some kind of rapacious, personal, deeply personal and sexual interest in her freaking vagina. Right? Like,
yeah, she was sexualizing the entire she was sexualizing the guy she targeted her sexual harassment at, and the entire assembly.
And she implied that he was being rapey about it, right? But no means no.
But can I just point out, if it was up to men, at least up to about 10 years ago, women would have the right to choose, hands down. If it was up to men only, if you did a vote and you excluded the female population, women would never have their right to choose threatened at all. There are more men who respect the idea that a woman should have rights over her body, up to including whatever her body is supporting, than there are women. And if we just left it up to the men, probably the debate would be over and never opened again. But it's because other women want to control women's bodies, and also, I mean, I'm misrepresenting the position as well, because it's also an issue of wanting to make sure that they save what they consider to be human life, and there's many arguments to agree with that, but what's irritating is that they blame this, what is essentially a female-driven activity, on men. Once again, on men. If only men decided on the right to choose, women would never lose the right to choose, ever.
Well, if all women stopped slut shaming, there wouldn't be any such thing as slut shaming.
Yeah, they constantly take these behaviors that are essentially intra-sex competition between women and blame men for it. And the only reason that works is because blame runs downhill and always hits the person who doesn't have the social power. They can't blame other women because that is actually dangerous. Blaming men is easy. That's why we do it. That's why every single scapegoat in society is usually the people who do not have the social power to command this kind of attention and awareness of the issues. It's so infuriating that this is so obvious.
Trump is also on the bandwagon and tweeted, quote, 26,000 unreported sexual assaults in the military and only 238 convictions. What did these geniuses expect when they put men and women together, unquote. Oh, I don't know, Trump. Maybe people expected men to not rape their coworkers? Maybe they expected rapists.
Oh God. Well, first of all, that's a complete, a significant portion of those sexual assaults are actually of male servicemen. And they notoriously underreport.
Yeah, so, and a certain number of those sexual assaults will be and sexual harassment will be by female service members.
Yeah, well, actually, I've run through the numbers. First of all, the rate at which male servicemen are sexually and physically harassed, or at least admit to it, is about, I think, 60 to 70% report a female aggressor. Which is actually astounding considering that they're in a population of only 20% women. You would expect that the level of men assaulting other men would be far higher in a population that's 80% male. But no, women are managing to outpace the men there too. And the reason why that's so, why this is astounding, is because the number of rapists in a population is proportional to the size of that population. So you would expect, you would expect 4 times the number of rapists in that population, of male rapists in that population, and most rapists target the opposite sex. So you're talking about a population, when you crunch all the numbers, the fact is that female service people, and actually also female civilians around who are targeting servicemen, are unusually rapey. No, actually, sorry. Female service members do disproportionate amounts of sexual violence. I know, it's fucking astounding. When you crunch the numbers, when you look at them, into them, that's what you find. There shouldn't be that many raped male servicemen. There shouldn't be that many male victims if the number of female rapists is proportionate to the female population. And I don't know what, Trump probably doesn't know this and will never know this and will never be open to that. It's just not going to happen. He probably doesn't think in those terms. Those are explicitly pro-male terms. Those are explicitly terms in which we care about men's vulnerabilities and we approach analyzing and arguing against the feminist presupposition in terms of a pro-male approach, pro-male position. I mean, neither Lacey nor Trump will ever conceive of what I've just said. What Trump said might actually indicate that he's aware of the high rate of sexual violence against men. It doesn't necessarily, it's not definitive proof. Because he didn't, I don't think he specified a gender at all. And also, he's right. When you put, because rapists tend to target the opposite sex, when you put men and women together, you probably are going to increase the rate of rape. Well, I just don't know if the military is different than any other circumstance where that happens.
I think as well, you have to look into he's talking about 23,000 or whatever reports of sexual assault. Okay, but how many? You have to realize that there are certain environments in which false reporting is encouraged, right? And in a place where you can lose your career for having an affair, an extramarital affair, and you get discovered, then that's a heavy incentive that's going to ruin your career. You're going to be drummed out of the military. You're going to be court-martialed. That's a criminal offense there to have an affair. That's a really, really strong incentive for filing a false report, right? So I think that the number of reports that are coming in through the military of sexual assault are probably not indicative of the actual reports made. Probably not indicative of the number of sexual I don't think that I think that it's more likely that there would be a high percentage of those that are false.
Okay, let's see what else Lacey has to say. And why did she read into the idea that Trump believes that? Because I actually sort of springboarded on her interpretation, and I realized post hoc that it was probably not a good idea. Why does she assume that Trump is just referring to female victims? He could also be referring to male victims. Maybe he's saying that women can't help themselves.
I think we can all agree on the fact that the media can't get its fill of lying about Trump, right? And that's bad on a number of levels. And one of the most important ones is really that it's very hard to recognize a genuine, well-substantiated criticism when you've seen the last 8 really, really, scathing articles about Trump be shown to be completely spurious. Right? Like, I mean, how many, he hired Russian hookers to pee on the bed that Obama and his wife slept in at a hotel in Russia, right? Like, how many of those things need to come up and be shown to be completely false, completely unfounded, absolute fabrications, right? Before people realize that, okay, maybe we shouldn't believe anything bad that anybody says about Trump.
Which is its own problem. So it's the thing is that what I see is a general disruption, or even like a decay of the social institutions that are required to keep a democracy or even a republic running and healthy. And none of this really strikes me as being a good thing. And to be honest, I would say that the election of Trump, with his very centrist political and in many ways moral, and the fact that he's also now sort of kowtowing to the narrative in terms of getting women in STEM and all the great opposition to female entrepreneurs in our society, and et cetera, et cetera. So he buys into this idea that women are being persecuted by society. All of this points to me to something that's, almost like a terminal decay. But this is, again, not an opinion that everyone holds. Not even everyone who takes part in Honey Badger Radio holds that opinion. So, like, you can't say that Honey Badger Radio believes this about Trump is the final word on this issue. I'm going to give Lacey kudos, because this part is an actual legitimate criticism. Even if we disagree with the criticism, you have to agree that it's legitimate. To call your leaders out on their economic policies is a good thing. To look closely at whether or not what they're saying is actually translating to what they say it will is a good thing. Criticizing the Republicans on their economic policies is an excellent thing to do. Excellent. You may be wrong, but it is legitimate and excellent criticism.
Or
saying
your criticism might be incomplete.
Incomplete, right? Or incorrect or wrong, but this is perfectly, like, this part of the video is Lacey doing something right. Surprisingly, criticizing these people on their economic policies is absolutely, in my opinion, it's absolutely legitimate. And I'm not saying it's legitimate because their criticism is necessarily correct. It's because it's the correct kind of criticism. This is what you want to see. You don't want to see the first half of this shit where she's talking about war on women shit or racism shit when it doesn't apply. That's narrative nonsense. That's let's identify a victim object and cast Republicans as the villain. That is going to destroy a society doing that enough. If you indulge in that too much, your republic goes bye-bye. But criticizing them on economic policy, criticizing them on how they treat how their policies affect all citizens, male, female, black and white, those are legitimate criticisms. Absolutely legitimate.
Agreed.
Now, we started off with this by sort of countering Lacey's criticism. I think Karen did more than me, probably because she has more of an awareness of this stuff than me. But I would like to point out that Lacey is doing something right. She is criticizing the Republicans in a way that they should be criticized for their policies and for their economic outlook. Regardless if you agree with it or not, she's doing something right here.
Taxing the poor would continue the cycle of poverty.
I think welfare continues the cycle of poverty.
Yeah, I think so.
Somehow you gotta get those kids their fathers back. That is the one thing you can do to end poverty.
Yeah, another thing that you can do is you can actually have at least one person in the household being gainfully employed, even if they're employed under the table. Even if you're collecting welfare and he goes out and mows lawns or whatever to make extra cash for the family, right? Having somebody out there earning some money through their own labor and setting that example for the kids is important.
Well, I mean, that may be important, but actually statistically, and I'm not saying that it isn't, but statistically, even if he was just staying at home doing nothing, the father would probably be doing better for his kids than not being there at all.
True.
And even like it doesn't even have to be gainful employment. If you just gave the father or the mother something to get out of the house to do, like a volunteer position.
Something productive that actually contributes to society.
You know, and even better, if you created an opportunity for them to do it with their kids. If we supported that kind of thing, like civil engineering projects or gardening projects, inner city gardening projects, and got those kids their fathers back, we would be doing way more to get.
What I find interesting too is like a lot of people who are on assistance and things like that. I mean, there are a lot of really weird jobs out there that are completely wacky, that they aren't enough to live on by any stretch of the imagination. Being a supervisor, a child recess supervisor at school, like in our school district, you cannot make the teachers do that. The teachers have to be guaranteed that they have their coffee breaks and their lunch breaks and that they're not working. And, and so they hire somebody to come in 15 minutes in the morning, 45 minutes at lunch hour, and 15 minutes in the afternoon to supervise students during recess and lunch break, right? They pay somebody to do this. This is not a job that can coexist with a second job. You can't do this job and do some other job because it's spread out throughout the whole day, right? This would be ideal for a housewife. This would be ideal for somebody who's on welfare, right? This would be ideal for somebody, who can be very casually, flexibly employed to earn just a little bit of extra money, right? There are all kinds of things that you can do that contribute to your community, that help out your community, and that also will earn you a little bit of extra cash. So,
yeah. But like I said, one of the main things is, and this is what frustrates with me with liberals and with a lot of liberal talking points. It is not just this one. They always seem to avoid what will actually help the situations that they're talking about in favor of the narrative. Like, Lacey would never promote the idea that kids in poverty need to have their fathers back, and that poverty could be considered institutional fatherlessness. You give those kids their fathers back, and they're more likely the next generation to work themselves out of poverty. But she would never embrace this one single thing that would improve the problem. I mean, and that's part of what I talked about in the fundraising video I just uploaded yesterday, is because we will not look at this outside of the narrative that women have it worse and always need to be focused on. We won't focus on men or anything to do with things that affect men. So we won't focus on the fact that the solution to the problem of poverty and kids not being able to get into and out of poverty is to give fathers or children rights to their fathers back, or their fathers' rights to them back. And it's like listening to people like Lacey talk about these issues like that this is going to be solved by having a Democratic president. It's not going to be solved by having a Democratic president. It's not going to be solved by your side winning. It's going to be solved by focusing on the men's issues at the root of the problem. You know, the thing that you're avoiding looking at. And the fact is that if you're not going to advocate the one solution that will actually solve the problem or do more to solve the problem than anything else, then how can you possibly be justified in using the problem to advance your particular narrative? You don't get that narrative anymore, Lacey, because you're not embracing what would solve it. You're just using it to perpetuate your own particular narrative and support your own particular team in this farce. So no longer do you get the poverty narrative, Lacey. You don't get it anymore. It's not yours. So you can't refer to it ever again.
On the Honey Badger Classic number 3, the original three amigos, Karen, Allison, and Hannah, have a discussion on the following topic. Do men have empathy?
I recently got into an argument with a commentator on a video about my statement that men are more compassionate than women. If you can find that comment exchange, I highly recommend it. I left it as I was feeling it was going nowhere. The commentator in question was trying to psychoanalyze my reasons for making my argument that men were more compassionate. And being psychoanalyzed, unfortunately, is one of my pet peeves. But it was otherwise a fruitful exchange, and I highly recommend it. A study in 2012 called, quite excitingly, Age-Related Sex Differences in Explicit Measures of Empathy Do Not Predict Brain Responses Across Childhood and Adolescence, found that when you take the element of self-reporting out of measured empathic response and instead rely on autonomous reflexes, those unconscious responses like pupil dilation, there is no difference in empathic response between male and female subjects. This study builds on an earlier study called Are There Gender Differences in Empathy? In that study, male and female subjects were asked to take the Interpersonal Reactivity Index test, which is a standard measure of empathy. In the study, the subjects taking the test were divided into two groups. One was told that the test measured empathy. The other was told that the test measured social ability. In the group that was told the test measured empathy, women scored higher. In the second group, the group that was told that it measured social ability, there was no difference in scores. What this means is that it's quite likely all the research into gender differences in empathy based on self-reporting is bunk. Women are reporting more empathy in order to be consistent with their social expectation to be more empathic. However, I did argue that not just that men are equally empathic to women, but that they are more compassionate. And this is my argument. The evidence is in that males and females experience an equal empathetic response to other suffering. However, only one gender is consistently shown to take self-sacrificial risks in response to this empathic stimuli. Let me give you an anecdotal example of my logic. Let's imagine a small boy is struggling in the strong current of a river. He's crying out in pain and terror as his mouth fills with water. His muscles are burning to the point of bursting, and he's starting to choke. Let's further imagine there's a woman on the bank watching this. She has an empathic response to the drowning boy and starts to tear up. But instead of doing anything, she runs off sobbing, leaving him to his fate to go to a local ice cream store and have a banana split to cheer herself up about the horrible thing she just witnessed and the horrible feelings it inspired in her. Now let's imagine instead there's a man on that riverbank. Instead of being so distraught he has to run away and soothe himself, he shrugs off the pain of his empathic response, ties a rope to a nearby tree, fords into the waters to pull the boy choking and gasping to safety. Now, both may be equally empathic, but which one is more compassionate? And thus we begin our discussion. Karen, did you want to chime in? You have.
I actually do. There's an author, I've heard him interviewed a couple of times, and he wrote a book called, I think it was called Against Empathy. And he was arguing essentially that the most empathetic people, the people who are most affected by their emotions, by the sort of the mirror response, and getting highly emotional when others around them are suffering. They're attracted to helping professions and stuff like that, but they don't do well in them. They burn out really quickly. And that essentially we need to stop using empathy and our feelings for suffering, that our mirrored feelings of suffering when we see suffering, in terms of making decisions. And I think that actually comes into this a little bit in terms of the difference between men and women. I would argue myself that the difference is not necessarily in the depth of feeling, and I don't think that it's that men are necessarily more compassionate than women, but that their compassion is effective. Whereas women's compassion in a moment like that, in a moment when being compassionate is risky, requires risk, like acting on your compassion requires risk, well, men simply have less aversion to risk. Men simply have a greater propensity for action. And so essentially, what you have is this response, I think, on the part of men that when those signals go in and they have that empathic or empathetic response to suffering, and there's anything at all that they can do, their first instinct is to shut all of that. Like, it goes down a completely different pathway, and the pathway that it goes down is not one of mirroring the feelings of the people that they're watching, but taking some form of action.
When I say that I think that men are more compassionate, I'm actually just, in many ways, I just put that out there as a point, because it starts to get the conversation rolling around this issue. We have such an entrenched belief that women are more empathic, more compassionate, and yet it's not really based on anything legitimate. And
okay, I would agree with that. We think women are more compassionate because they're more likely to cry at the end of a romantic comedy, right? And we think men are less compassionate because they don't. Okay, but who's running into a burning fucking building to save, the baby and the pet freaking iguana?
This happening to men everywhere is a terrible thing. It's a break in women's maturity that women do this. This isn't the way things used to be. You read things that were written by men and women who wrote about pioneer life, who wrote about explorers, who wrote about what it was like to be lower class or middle class before the technological age. Women were not that skittish. They couldn't be. Their families wouldn't survive if they were that skittish. They couldn't be that skittish towards their husbands. And it's a function or a dysfunction of how pampered we have become in modern society, that women can be that skittish today. There's sort of been this divide between women back then and women today, where men are still expected to do all that stuff. Men are still expected to handle whatever comes along. Women are not. And they used to be expected to at least handle what women were considered capable of handling. They understood that women didn't necessarily have the same physical strengths as men, but they were still expected to be capable of handling life's challenges. And it's very disturbing today. And they were expected to be able to handle that their fellow human beings, regardless of sex, were still human. And today they're not.
Like Warren Farrell has said, is that kids don't learn empathy by having a parent or two parents who do nothing but understand and empathize with them. Empathy does not teach empathy. What teaches empathy is boundaries. What teaches empathy is learning that you are not the center of the universe. What teaches empathy is learning that other people have feelings, needs, and priorities too, right?
And they're not an attack on you if they do.
Yeah.
That's a lesson I see that a lot of I hate to say it, because then people are gonna be like, "Oh my God, you're criticizing women." Well, they sort of do need some criticism. It's a lesson that I don't see a lot of women learning, that when somebody has needs, it's not an attack on you, and it's no more healthy for women than it is for men. Could you mute again, Hannah? I'm just
Yeah,
having
yeah.
a little bit of fun.
Well, one thing that you're talking about, though, I want to point something out, because people do say that we're criticizing women all the time. We're not. We're criticizing society. Women, what we're talking about is not an inherent nature. It's a social condition, and it needs to be fixed, because it hasn't always been this way, and it doesn't have to always be this way. But I'm going to mute and let you finish.
Yeah, well, exactly. This is when women express these kinds of this terror at the idea of men's vulnerabilities. It's because they haven't come to the point where they feel like they can rely on themselves. To be quite frank, it's because of a lack of independence and an encouragement of dependency that our society does towards women. This idea that, and it was in something that Cassie said in one of the interviews I did with her, Cassie J, who was a filmmaker for the Red Pill. Incidentally, you should go to Amazon and get a copy, pre-order a copy. But she said that feminism, with its narrative about how women were victims, she didn't have to be wrong. When she was a feminist, she didn't have to be wrong. And it's that feeling that you can't be wrong, and also you can't learn from being wrong. That's in many ways is the underpinning of this. And when men fail to embody that standard of strength, it's this feeling like you've never really stood on your own 2 feet. You've always been cocooned in this victim narrative that allowed you to not be wrong. And falling is how you learn to stand back up again and learn that you can stand back up again. There's a complete depredate, like women don't get this teaching. It's an entire school of life that women are denied entry to. And because they're denied entry to, when they see the people that they are, the group of people that feminism and society has taught is so much stronger, more powerful, more effectual, more capable of creating society and being strong and navigating society, the choppy waters of the society without submerging themselves. When they see men who feminism regard as the most powerful entities in society, when they see men as being having fragility or vulnerability, it scares the crap out of them. Because if the man isn't there to pull them up, if the man isn't there for he, for she, what happens when a woman falls? She's never been allowed to go through that process of being wrong, falling, and getting herself back up. Never, because of the victim narrative spares her from that growth. The victim narrative spares her from that growth. So, and this is something. This is a horrible thing that we do to women.
Like I said before, what we have been criticizing is the way society shapes women today versus the way women stood out in the past. And we're in a situation today where women are coddled to a point of never getting the benefit of fully growing up. And that's not a criticism particularly of women, but a criticism of the society that we live in. Feminists get all bent out of shape if we call the toxic masculinity narrative hatred of men. But they cannot stand to hear us talk about the other side of that coin, the actual situation of toxic femininity. This is exactly what we've been talking about today. They have no compassion. It is not compassionate to protect someone from that which helps them grow. This one is, I just became aware of this today. In January of 2016, the Hamilton Spectator of Hamilton, Ontario, reported that the staff elder counselor of a local Aboriginal health center had been arrested and charged with sexual assault. James Cook, then 67, went through a year-long investigation and trial before being acquitted. The Spectator reported his acquittal on February 10th of this year. All of the media outlets that covered the story The Spectator was the only one who reported that part of it. During that year-long ordeal, Mr. Cook was fired from his position at the health center. He faced deteriorating health throughout his legal battle, all without an income. A fundraiser has been initiated to help Mr. Cook regain some of his legal expenses and the income lost due to his experience. On the 24th of February, I'm going to butcher this poor woman's name, I'm sorry, Margaret Schimba, also of The Spectator, discussed Mr. Cook's case in an editorial where she pointed out that the case never should have made it to trial in the first place. Mr. Cook, she wrote, was acquitted because of inconsistencies with the victim's testimony, which should have impacted the decision to pursue this case. Among those inconsistencies was the accuser's claim that Mr. Cook committed the alleged crime in his office on a day when he was not actually at the office. In addition to his wife's testimony that he was at home, there were corroborating witnesses to his absence who were at his workplace on the day of the alleged incident. As she pointed out, this relates to the recent controversial news that 1 in 5 sexual assault accusations in Canada are considered baseless and dropped by investigators. The self-described Believe the Woman supporter asked the question with a 30% unfounded rate, why did the police pursue this case and not many others? She wondered whether the case would have been dropped if Mr. Cook had been white. I wonder, with cases like Mr. Cook's making it to trial, how flimsy are the other 30%, or are the 30% of cases bearing the label unfounded? How impossible does a woman's story have to be before police admit the man she accused is not suspect?
Canada seems to be the country right now that actually has people saying we should move sexual assault cases out of the normal criminal courts with the normal due process, even the bastardized normal due process that exists in sexual assault cases, and move them to a quasi-civil, quasi-criminal hybrid court where all of the complainant-friendly functions of both court systems will apply, and all of the accused-friendly due process protections will not apply. And so essentially, we are the ones, Canada, even above Sweden, I think, are the ones who are leading the charge to try and get this kind of it's essentially Canada's rape activists are arguing that our criminal court system for sexual assault should operate the way American college campus tribunals do.
That's what I was just going to say. You mean the way they're doing it on college campuses here in the U.S.?
Yeah, and you'd be able to apply criminal and monetary penalties, right? So essentially being able to fine people and being able to jail people, right, based on a preponderance of the evidence, a reversal of the burden of proof, zero due process, being able to compel an accused to testify, discovery going both ways, the complainant being represented by the prosecutor rather than the people being represented by the prosecutor in the public interest, and all of these things that are there to protect an individual from the immense power of the state bearing down on them. All of those would be gone, and the state would become a complainant's own personal Tony Soprano, as I have put it before, their own personal mafia and their own personal grievance machine that would act on their behest free of charge, with all of the powers of the state, with all of the investigative powers of the police, with all of the prosecutorial powers of the crown, right? But representing the complainant rather than the people, and without any of the due process protections available to the accused in a normal criminal case.
In some ways, the fact that social justice warriors, in the presence of this, in this kind of narrative that's being created, this narrative that is, allowing the government to cast one half of its citizens as enemy combatants and the other half is fraternizing with the enemy. The fact that there are social justice warriors who are just becoming completely unmanageable and melting the fuck down under this narrative may actually be a good thing.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. I think we're seeing it turn around simply because the dysfunction has been pushed too far. It's gotten pushed to the point where it's too open and too obvious. Even the trolls are often too open and too obvious. And this is the kind of thing you have to take people unaware with. If you don't take people unaware with it, they stop you. And I think today what we're looking at, the pushback that we're looking at, and the special snowflake freakout, the Tumblr syndrome, that stuff, that is perfect because it's pulling out of people the reaction that needs to happen to put the brakes on. The next thing that needs to happen, though, is people need to have enough of that reaction. I'm going to say it again. You've got to contact your legislators. Look online, how to contact your representative, how to contact your senator, how to contact your president, how to contact the White House, and write to them, call them, send them a fax, do whatever you have to. Let them know that you're dissatisfied with the progressive social justice pattern that's going on. Let them know that due process matters. Let them know that equal representation under the law isn't gendered. The law shouldn't be gendered. If you get that message across to your legislators, they will be afraid to continue to just take these steps.
And just to add to my point about the social justice warriors, I mean, who knew that Trugglypuff might actually be an immune response to this bullshit? Maybe it's, like I said, the fact that social justice warriors, their brains seem to melt down in the presence of this narrative might be a good thing.
She's an autoimmune disease.
Yeah, she's not an she's an autoimmune reaction to a disease.
Yeah.
That this narrative. Maybe one day we'll thank all of the Trigglypuffs in the world. Be like, oh my God, you guys.
She's the personification of hives. They let us know when we touched poison ivy.
Finally, on Fireside Chat number 50, I have the pleasure of talking to Liberty Bell and Lady for Philip Davies, Elizabeth Hobson.
Basically, I think that I've instinctively always been passionate about justice and equality. And so for a long time, I assumed that made me a feminist. And I was sort of thinking back today to my very sort of first thoughts on the issue. And I was remembering maybe when I was about 14 and we learned about the suffragettes in school. Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking what a sort of biased impression we got. Because, I remember we learned that they fought for our right to vote. And I remember that
some would say that suffragettes died for the right to vote. You learn that in academia, even though I think there's only one woman who died, and it was because she basically threw herself in front of a
horse.
Yeah, in front of a horse.
Yeah. Yeah, you see, I don't think we learned about that. I know we learned that they chained themselves to buildings and that they were arrested and went on hunger strike in prison. Mm-hmm. But we were never told how violent they were. We were never told about the bombs. We were never told about the plots to assassinate our prime minister. And it's like, I was just thinking today, why is that? Yeah. But I'm diverging. Shall I go off on this tangent or should I pull it back? What do you think?
No, diverge. Go ahead. Go off on the tangent.
Okay. Well, then I started thinking that it's not just feminism, is it? It's we also learnt about the slave trade, and we learnt an incredibly biased kind of story of slavery as well. We were never told that actually everyone in the world, every sort of country and nationality has at one point in time, had slaves, and most of them have been slaves as well.
Yes.
We were certainly never told about, the Muslim slave trade in the Middle East, and how barbaric that was, and how there were far more people involved, far more victims. And so, I think the joining thread there between those two issues, the suffragettes and the slave trade, is like we've found a way of teaching it where we can blame white men.
Yes, and then you have to ask, because I ended up asking this once I found out all these things, was why was the education system telling me only half of the story or a certain facet without, giving me the full context? Like when we talk about slavery, why is it we don't, there is no real discussion about how global it was and how basically at one point in history, every nation or every ethnicity or every people has been enslaved at one point, and it was almost like it's just sort of part of being a human being living in a world that essentially is just, it's savagery everywhere. Everyone's just fighting for survival, and that means that other people get screwed in the process. But that's not really the way it was put forward when I learned about it in school, that this was just like a part of the human condition, and that we today, as what I would consider to be more enlightened people, can look back at that and say, well, this is not something that only a certain kind of person can be prone to doing. This is something that we all as human beings are essentially it's almost like we're in a constant state of fighting against that. But I mean, it just so happens that we, live in a modern enough time that we can look back on the way things were and objectively say, yes, this happened, but we live here now, and so we can make the world better, instead of focusing on things like inherited guilt and shame for belonging to the wrong race or the wrong gender, for that matter, because that's what feminism does, right? It blames men as a group for all of the suffering in the world, and it judges the value of any society or culture based on how it treats its women. You're 14 years old.
No, I've got older. I've become pregnant with my first child, haven't I?
Yeah, yes, you have your son on the way. And
I've started to talk to feminists and get into the literature and discovered that it's not quite what I imagined.
Do you think you were thinking about your son at the time? Like that?
Well, I didn't know.
Oh, you didn't know you had a son coming?
No, but then I'm trying to think. I think I probably was a feminist after I'd had him for a little while. But I mean, at the same time as I was falling out of, not getting on with the label and getting told by feminists to hand in my feminist card and all this kind of stuff, I started meeting MRAs and anti-feminists online. One of whom, one of the very first people I met, is a woman called Catherine, who's one of the Liberty Bells. She's at Female Fed Up with Feminism on Twitter, which is where I met her. And they started showing me better information and better ideas, and they were nicer people who had similar values to me. So there was, what, I actually meant to go onto my blog today and find out when I wrote this piece, because there's this piece that I wrote that's kind of a tombstone, and it was called Why Every Feminist Should Also Be an MRA. And I kind of published that, and I think like the next day I'd go, you know what, I can't keep up being a feminist. I just can't. So I sort of called myself an MRA for a while, and then I came to feel a little more Fiedelbergian. I don't know if you know Fiedelbergian.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
He's got a great quote, which is, "You can't help men without wrecking feminism."
Well,
which I concur with, and so
and okay,
for quite a long time now, I've been simply an anti-feminist.
In your mind, why do you think that it's necessary that feminism has to be sort of combated or taken down or what have you? Why do you think it's the obstacle?
They're just so entrenched in all these positions of power and influence in government, in the media, in education, in the civil service, in the social services.
In the entertainment industry, in, as you said, social services, psychiatric care, therapy, the courts. Yes.
So, they're supremely powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got that. They've also got the sort of power over the hearts and minds of the public through like 100 years of feminist propaganda.
Yeah.
So that, for example, there was a debate in our parliament recently about this bill, and this bill is to it's called, what's it called? I have got it written down really close. It's colloquially known as the Honour Killings Bill, and it rules out the term, here we go, right. It's called the Crime, brackets, Aggravated Murder of and Violence Against Women, close brackets, Bill. So it outlaws the term honour killings, because there's nothing honourable about murder, requires British authorities to prosecute those who beat and murder British women abroad, help bring back the women, or pay for the repatriation of bodies of those murdered. Right?
Mm-hmm.
This was being discussed, and an MP called Philip Davies, do you know him?
Yes. Well, I met him at the ICMI, and we've been trying to get him on, but he's extremely busy. But yes, I know who Philip Davies is.
Well, I hate to tell you, but he has agreed to talk to the Liberty Bells. He's given us dates and everything.
See, that's what us in the Honey Badger Radio call gynocentrism. That's the reason. Just throwing it out there.
Absolutely. But he stood up and said, the bill is great and I completely agree with all of the aims, but what about the 24% of victims who are male? Can we not make it gender neutral? And the entire parliament jeered at him and booed him and were like shouting at him, and passed the bill. It was only in its sort of first reading, I think, but they passed it unanimously apart from him. And the thing is, it caused no public outrage either. Mm-hmm. So that's the institutional power, because you've got Nusra Ghani, who calls herself a feminist, proposing this bill, and then you've got all of the other MPs who've all been to university and been indoctrinated into feminism, just accepting it blindly, and then you've got the power over hearts and minds of society, meaning that nobody's pissed off about it.
Yeah.
And then we had the exact same thing with the Istanbul Convention a couple of days ago.
Someone in the chat asked, and I'm going to let you answer, because I'd like to hear what you have to say. They want to know what the drawbacks of circumcision are. They must be one of our more recent listeners.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, what I would advise is that person goes and has a look at Tim Hammond's Global Survey of Circumcision Harm, which is the largest survey of its kind. There was 1,000 men asked about their experiences. And I've got a list here. So if you don't mind me
Nope, not at
doing
all.
a bit of reading. Participants to this study reported suffering from a myriad of harms, including 10% had partial or total loss of the penile body, 56% had little to no shaft skin mobility on erection, 45% had hair along the mid to upper shaft causing friction during sex, 67% reported an insensitive glans. That's from a process called keratinization. It happens when it's unprotected, when the glans is unprotected and it rubs against clothing. 75% reported the dry keratinized glans, which required lubricants before sex. 31% reported erectile dysfunction, with circumcised men being 4.5 times more likely to take pharmaceuticals for erectile dysfunction. 6% reported penile bleeding during sex, 8% that the scar is painful, 27% that the scar is numb, and then you get to the emotional damage. So we had 71% reporting anger, 72% reporting frustration, 37% reporting shame. This is a very sort of emotive one for me. 55% felt betrayed by a lack of protection from harm by the mother. 50% betrayed by lack of protection from harm by the father. 73% that their human rights were violated. 62% reported that their condition impedes their sexual relationships. 32% that it adversely affects their relationship with the mother. 29% that it adversely affects the relationship with their father. 65% that it causes them to distrust the medical profession. 33% that it causes them to feel unsafe in their society. And 36% have sought help for the harm that they've been subjected to. Now, obviously, this survey, by the very nature of it being the global survey of circumcision harm, may well have been self-selecting. So, you know, these numbers
I see
are
what
huge.
you're saying.
But they
these
could
numbers...
it could well mean that it's actually a minority who are experiencing this kind of stuff. But still, you know, in my opinion, that's far, far too many. And if it was, you know, a minority of women suffering from these things from FGM, we wouldn't be sitting having a discussion over whether actually it's kind of all right, which is what you get into when you show people these numbers.
Yeah. And for those people who don't know, when she says self-select, this means that the men who are most likely suffering from some side effects are the ones that take the survey, whereas there's probably a majority of men who have been circumcised that don't have any symptoms that didn't bother taking the survey. However, that doesn't, and as to your point, Elizabeth, that does not mean that male genital mutilation is, you know, something that we shouldn't be talking about and trying to, you know, eliminate, because if this was female genital mutilation, there would be no discussion about whether or not this is okay.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've got nothing against genital mutilation per se. If it's an 18-year-old, I don't care what they want to do to their body, even if it's incredibly foolish and likely to lead to, you know, not very good outcomes. It's the fact that it's done to children who can't consent that really fucks me off.
We hope you enjoyed this clip show. If there was a clip from these shows you think we should have shown, please leave a comment on the original video and include a timestamp. Thank you, and Badger on.